Sean McCarthy, Chair of Olympic environmental watchdog the Commission for a Sustainable London 2012, tells Edie what is and is not happening to make this the greenest Games ever.
Today you publish your report into the London Games. What are the main findings?
Okay, we're looking at carbon related to the London Olympics, and we've looked at the carbon footprint of the London Games from the time that the bid was won until the closing ceremony, so we looked at that whole period. I think the Olympics have actually set out some quite ambitious objectives around carbon, and we've been quite impressed. So 50% reduction in carbon in legacy compared to the 2006 building regulations, very good. There's some fantastic carbon infrastructure is going into the Olympic Park, so there's combined heat and power for heating, cooling, and for electricity for the Olympic Park. We've been very impressed with that. There's a wind turbine going in. There's lots of renewable energy options being considered. So overall, the Olympic delivery bodies are doing pretty much everything they said they would do. However, we think there's a bigger picture. There are some issues related to the carbon footprint from the Games. We're very impressed with the work that's been done to establish a carbon footprint, but we still have nearly 2 million tonnes of carbon associated with that period of time, which is the cost of running the Games. We think that carbon should be mitigated in some way by learning the lessons and actually influencing other industries.
You gave some examples there of what the report mentioned, and there's other things like a sustainable flame, sustainable concrete. What else is the Games doing?
Okay, I think that the sustainable flame has been dismissed as a bit of tokenism, but I think it's a very good idea. You know, the notion of having the Olympic flame from some renewable form of fuel, I think, is excellent. Certainly the ODA have done a great job in terms of looking at what we call embodied energy in construction. So for instance, the amount of energy that it takes to make concrete is quite significant. And by tendering effectively and going out to the market effectively, I think they've done an excellent job of that. So we have seen carbon being addressed in a variety of different ways. The design of the Velo Park, by way of example, that's a building that's very, very efficient in use, so it has all of the thermal efficiency characteristics that we would expect. But it's also very sustainable in build because it's a very light building, it's a light structure, it uses very little material, so the amount of material that goes into the building is very small. And I think we can all learn lessons from that.
Sustainability has been a buzzword at these Olympics. Is this being achieved?
In the main, yes. I think the objectives that were set out at the beginning of the Games were quite challenging, and I think with some exceptions, in the main, the sustainability objectives are being achieved. What we need to understand, though, is the promise that we hear from people like Lord Coe to set new standards of sustainability, and that's different from just doing a good job. The important thing from that point of view is that the lessons are learned elsewhere and applied in a wider context. So we don't just have a unique achievement of a sustainable Olympics. This is something that actually sets a trend for more sustainable construction and more sustainable events in the future.
What have we learned from this Games in terms of the carbon savings?
I think the fact that the carbon footprinting has been done is a major step forward, and that all of the carbon impacts, including the embodied impacts in construction materials, have been considered. I think that should be an example for future Olympics, and that's something that we're talking to the IOC about and for future Games, because if you look at major sporting events at the moment, many of them are doing carbon footprints. So that the World Cup bid for England, the Vancouver Winter Games, the London Games, all have carbon footprints, but they all start from different assumptions, and it's not possible to benchmark across them. So I think we need a more consistent way of measuring, but what we've learned from the Olympics can actually help us to do that.
You talked about how this could be applied to other sporting events like the World Cup, but can it be applied to other projects, sporting and non-sporting events?
Definitely. Construction, one of the things that we've discovered from doing the carbon footprint is that in fact the majority of the carbon associated with the Games is in construction materials. It's not in flights. People will tend to think loads of people flying around the world to watch a few people running around. That's very wasteful and it's very carbon intensive. Yes, you could argue that. But actually the amount of energy that goes into the construction materials is far greater. More than 60% of the entire carbon footprint is related to construction materials, and a relatively small percentage is associated with flights. So the construction industry, I think, can learn a lot from this, because we don't traditionally, when we think about construction, think about embodied carbon as a target. The UK Sustainable Construction Strategy only thinks about carbon in the built environment. So I think there is a lesson here for the construction industry. We can create some new knowledge which ultimately can make UK PLC more competitive.
And what more could be done around carbon?
Okay, I think the combined heat and power system on the Olympic Park is great, but it relies on natural gas for its fuel. It should be possible to use biogas. The engines on the park apparently are technically capable of doing this, but there is no source of biogas in East London. This could come from waste. It could come from a process called anaerobic digestion, and if some waste infrastructure was developed in East London that can produce the gas, then we can move towards zero carbon. We've been recommending this for 2 years now, and we're getting quite impatient. We know that the Mayor wants this to happen. We're not actually seeing action, and we're not seeing facilities being developed. We think this is becoming quite urgent, because if there isn't a consent for a plant within the next few months, then the chance of actually having biogas available for games time starts to diminish, and we think that would be very sad. It's a major opportunity to move from a 50% reduction in carbon to maybe a 90% reduction for the energy supply to the village, and that would be a fantastic opportunity.
And last question, will this be the greenest games ever?
It's a very, very difficult one to answer. I think some great stuff has been done, and London has the potential to be the greenest games ever. The difficulty is that you can't actually measure that with any degree of certainty. There is a global reporting initiative programme being developed to look at how the sustainability of major events is measured, so we can actually benchmark across from one to the other. But if we take a look at London and what's been done, 50% reduction in carbon emissions, 90% waste diverted from landfill during construction, zero waste to landfill during games time, improvements in biodiversity, fantastic achievement in terms of the way in which we've involved ethnic minority communities and local communities in employment, and a very, very strong healthy living agenda. That's pretty sustainable, and I think there's a big challenge now for Rio to actually take that challenge on board and do better than London in the next Olympics.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.